Hi, the very first book that I'm going to talk to you about today is a book called Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. This is a story about a little girl who has dyslexia, and it talks about how she has this love for reading when she's a younger little girl, and her grandparents read to her, and her brothers and sisters would read to her, and then when she starts school, she realizes that she has a difficulty with reading, and the words on the page look blurry and different than other people, but she doesn't know why. It takes her all the way until the fifth grade, and when she meets her new teacher, Mr. Falker, and he's the first person to help notice that something was different about Trisha. This is an illustration that I would like to share with everybody. This was the moment that Mr. Falker realized that Trisha was dyslexic, and he had asked her to write certain numbers and letters on the whiteboard with water because she was there to erase the chalkboards, and he said that they wanted to play a game, and so he realized then that this was what she was seeing, and when he would shout out different letters or numbers. The biggest lesson that I would like my students to take away from this is that we may not see a physical difference from our peers, but that doesn't mean that there's not things that make us different, and that's okay. And so I think that this book is a great example of Trisha, who looks just like every other kid in her class, has this learning difficulty that other children in her class may not have. And so I think this is a great book to share, especially with a student that has dyslexia. And so my activity that I would do for this would be to have my students get their test folders out and tell them that they're going to take a quiz. And with this quiz, what I would do is I would have a second grade passage that is something that a student with dyslexia would see. So the passage would be difficult for my children to make out what was being said, but I'm not going to tell them that this is what I'm doing. So when they get the test, they're not going to be able to read the test. And so they're going to be confused. They're going to probably ask me a bunch of questions. But the point of this lesson is I want for my students to see what a student with dyslexia actually sees. And this activity would help provide my students with an experience of more understanding of what a child with dyslexia actually has to go through every single day. So that would be my activity for that. This story, Thank You, Mr. Falker, is also at a fourth grade reading level. So even though it is a picture book, I would read this as a read aloud for my second graders that I teach. And they are allowed to read it independently or with a partner afterwards. But because it's a higher difficulty level, I would definitely make this more of a read aloud for my younger students. And that's it for my first book. Book that I'm going to talk to you about today is The Invisible Boy, and it's written by Trudy Ludwig. This book is about a little boy named Brian who feels invisible, and he feels this way because he's very lonely. Nobody in his class will play with him, and they leave him out on things, and so he just feels invisible and like no one can see him. One day everything changes when a new student named Justin moves to his class, and Justin's family is Korean, and his food that he brings for lunch is bulgogi, and bulgogi is a Korean barbecue. And everything changes for Justin too, because when he starts his new school, the kids were undecided how they felt about him, but then when he was telling them about what he was eating for lunch and using his chopsticks, some of the students were saying that he was eating boogergy instead of bulgogi, and so they were finding ways to tease Justin. Once the kids started teasing Justin, Brian decided to write a note for Justin, and he leaves it in his cubby and just talks about how he thought the Bulgogi looked good. And you see Brian start to make a new friend. And so he's no longer becoming invisible because Justin now becomes his friend. And it's really, really, really sweet of a book. The greatest lesson that I hope that my students gain from reading The Invisible Boy is for them to learn to show kindness and to make sure that no one in their class ever feels invisible like Brian did in the beginning of the story. So my activity for this book would be to have my students take out a white crayon, and I would pass out a blank piece of copy paper. So just a plain piece of white paper and then a white crayon. And I would have each student write something that they could do that for somebody that would be kind. And they're just writing with a white crayon on the paper. And so it's invisible. And then after everyone has written their act of kindness down, we would take watercolors and color over where they had written, and then their act of kindness would no longer be invisible and it would be shown. So this is just a really great visual for our students to know, like, if they don't put an action to the act of kindness, then it's just invisible, it's not there. But then if they actually, put legs behind it, and they can really make a difference and show their kindness towards other kids. This book also is at a second grade reading level, and I teach second grade. Last book that I'm going to talk to you about today is titled Of the Icing, and it was written by Barack Obama. This was a letter he wrote to his daughters, and it is at a sixth grade reading level. When I was reading this story, I didn't feel like it was that difficult of a text, even though it was ranked as a sixth grade reading level. I definitely feel like after doing this as a read aloud with my students that they would be able to read it with a partner or read it on their own for sure. Throughout this book, Barack Obama is telling his daughters, have I told you that you are, and he names a characteristic that he wants them to know that they are or that they could be. So I'm going to show you a few pictures of those moments. So the first one that I want to show you was he said, have I told you that you are smart? And then on this side, he talks a little bit about a famous person in history, which was Albert Einstein. And so he was using him as an example. There were others that he said, for this characteristic, he said, have I told you that you are brave? And then he has a picture of Jackie Robinson and talks about Jackie Robinson. And so he goes on throughout the story with every characteristic that he wants his daughters to know that they are. He also shares a famous person from history. And here's another one that I really liked. And he said, have I told you that you are strong? And then in the photo to the right is Helen Keller. So it goes on and on throughout the book with different people from history, and it has a lot of famous Americans that were of all different cultures and all different kinds of backgrounds, and so I thought that was really special. One page that I really liked was the one where he talks about, have I told you that America is made up of people of every kind? And he goes on to say that people of all races, religions, and beliefs. And he goes on with more, but it shows a lot of the famous Americans in this photo that he mentions throughout his story. So this one is a really great read, and it's to me it's a very encouraging read, and to instill to your students all the things that they are, that they may not even realize that they are, but we want them to know that they are. After reading this story to my students, my activity extension for this would be to have my students pick 3 friends around the room, and they would have to share something about them. Like, have I told you, just like Barack Obama started each page off with, have I told you, and then named a characteristic. I would like for them to find something good and special about each person in our classroom to share an have I told you moment. Have I told you, you're good at math, or have I told you that you are a kind friend, or, something like that. But I would like for them to find 3 people to share something like that with in our class. I think it would even be a really great idea to have them also do this as a writing activity, and they could pick a different adult in the school. It could be anybody from a past teacher or librarian, music teacher, art, PE, so on. They could pick something, have I told you, and they could share something that they would like for those people to know. So I think that you could go a lot of different routes with this, but I think that that would make this really special. So that will wrap up my 3 book activities. I really enjoyed talking to you guys about these. But I had, again, Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. We had The Invisible Boy by Trudy Ludwig. And also Of Thee I Sing, written by Barack Obama. Thank you.